In 1974, President Richard Nixon resigned. The Dow Jones closed the year at 616. And in sports, Muhammad Ali regained the heavyweight championship from George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. 1974 was also a year of a historic event locally, the hiring of the first 2 women as police officers by the Sacramento Police Department. Felicia Allen and Flossie Crump were pioneers and trailblazers, demonstrating that women could also protect and serve their community. They join us to share their stories next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Felicia, what was that first day like when you joined the force?
That first day, actually going into roll call, was pretty crazy. It was TV, newspaper, radio.
Really?
There was so much publicity about us starting as officers on patrol that we really didn't have a feeling of what a normal roll call was going to be like for probably weeks, because there was so much attention to us being there. And
ironically, being the first female, we were put on the first row in roll call. You know, you had 5, 6, 7 rows of officers behind, but we were right there on the front row.
And I think that was for the media, so that they could get those pictures and all that. But it was really a negative, because then we didn't get a chance to get a feeling of the guys behind us.
And I think some of the officers didn't know that we were coming as first females. So it was, as new as it was to us, it was, I guess, a surprise to some of them, because there we were sitting in roll call with them, and they had no idea that we were coming.
And after you did roll call, did you immediately get assigned partners and go out in the street, or what happened?
Well, at roll call, before we all walked out, we knew which unit or who we were going to be assigned to. And I believe they had talked to the officers that would be our training officers prior to. So they knew that they were going to get one of us, but we didn't know which of them we were going to get until we actually, walked out of roll call.
What was that like when you met your training officer?
You know, that was probably the most calming of the first interactions in law enforcement, because my training officers, Jean Burchett and Rick Jones, and I'm sure you're going to say the same about yours, were going against the grain. They had already decided that they were going to support us. They were going to give us as much knowledge as they could. They were going to make sure that we were going to be the best of the best of the best. And the thought was, before we showed up, there was kind of an agreement around the department that they were going to let us drown. They weren't going to be supportive of us. Yes, they did not want us to succeed or make it. And somehow the 4 training officers got together and decided, no, this isn't right. Let's treat these women fairly and treat them like police officers and teach them how to be police officers. Yeah. And that's what they did.
I think we said 4, I think, because at the time they kind of rotated out of the vehicles, in that I had George Brown, who was excellent, and then there was Dana Falkenhauer, and then there was Bob Gillis, and it was like 3, and we rotated during the week. So we got to work with, or I got to work with 3 training officers who actually turned out to be just awesome guys, because they were the very first one. So they kind of went through some of the first things that we went through. They were exposed to that as well, but having been there for a while, they were the one that shored us up and said, they saw, as Leon Taylor did, who recruited us, saw some abilities in us that, some that we probably didn't even recognize ourselves, and definitely some that they thought was worth hanging in there with.
What were some of the things that you both experienced up front when you first joined?
The negative or the positive?
Give us both.
Do you want the good, the bad, or the ugly?
Well, I have to admit, I thank God, and I'm very fortunate that we did have that first impression, those first training officers,
Oh.
that was a pivotal part
were a
of
godsend.
our training. And then the other stuff, because it's like when we come back off of patrol, we come into the room.
The locker room.
The locker room. Oh gosh.
The locker room was.
Yeah.
The locker room
We
was.
didn't have a locker room.
No, they weren't. They weren't at all prepared for women
Yeah.
to be. Well, there were only 2 of us. How can you prepare for that
Yeah.
with 500 men? So the locker room was a maze that they had created so that the women, the
Using
2 of
lockers.
us, went in one side and the men went on the other side. So once you entered into this locker room, I mean, we're surrounded by men. They're all on one side of the wall, and we're on the other side of the wall, and it's not a wall, it's just lockers. So they're pushing, they're throwing things over the lockers, they're talking as loudly as they can, as negatively as they can about us, words that we really can't even use on public TV. But, you know, that was coming in at the end of shift every day, there that was.
Well, you know, even backing up further than that, when you think in terms of being the first patrol officers, there were no uniform designed for women. And
There were no
No,
uniform?
there were no uniforms.
Well, no,
and
because-
at the time, the standard was the hair had to be a certain length. We wore the hat, and it's kind of I kind of laugh at it now because I actually still have my first uniform, but it's like, and of course I was a little bit lighter weight, but we had to take them in uniform. You know, men generally the pockets are this far apart, right? And when we had to alter them, we had our pockets were like this. The shirt
The
pockets
shirts.
also came in. So we literally had to take the uniform, shirt, pants, etc., that were made for the men and have them kind of readjusted for us, which means it was kind of interesting. So we had to do that, and then like I said, our hair,
The
we had to
hair.
wear the
Couldn't
hat.
touch the collar.
So you had to cut your hair.
Yes.
Yeah, the hair
yes.
couldn't touch the collar.
And we couldn't
and
wear
it
it
could
up or
only be
anything
so
like
far
that.
from the ears. So if you had the afro really became an issue because I don't know, if my earlier pictures, I had an afro when I
Yeah.
came on the department. So the afro became an issue. It could only be so many inches from the head, and they would measure from the head so many inches. And then it became an issue about it sticking out under the hat. So, which, you know, has nothing to do with your performance, but I did get written up many times for the hat.
After a while, we got I think at the time they were called second chance or the safety vests. They were not designed for us at all. Literally flat, flat chested.
Two
Yeah, it was
two
just 2
boards that-
panels, front and back.
Front and back.
Yeah, and then even the belt, they eventually came to what they call the Sally Brown, whereas before it was a sand brown, which was the man's belt. So it was an interesting time. So
Felicia, what was the most challenging aspect of the culture of the Sacramento Police Department at the time you joined?
The most challenging aspect of the culture within the department or
Yeah.
within the community?
Within
There
the
were two.
department.
Within the department, the most challenging aspect was getting the guys to trust us. They, this was new for them too. So here come these women, they're intruding in their territory, they're intruding on their turf. We needed to prove to them that we could do the job. And getting them to trust us, I would say, was and they would just say, we'd go to calls. I know this happened to Flossie too. We'd go to calls and the guys would talk among themselves and say, no, man, I don't trust her, I don't trust her, I don't trust her.
Trust them to back you up? Trust them?
All the way around. I think clearly, because women were there, I think we stopped a lot of things that would have happened had we not been there. I think we created an atmosphere where violence was not always going to be the first order of defense, that maybe we're going to do things differently. And there were times when I went on calls and the guys would be tussling with someone, and in one situation I remember really clearly, the officer had his baton out and he was going to hit this kid over the head, and his partner saw me and my partner roll up and he said, no man, no man, and he looked back at me. And that happened more than a few times. So I think the culture was getting them to trust us, getting them to change their behavior because of our presence, and that was challenging. Changing the whole culture of the department from one of being aggressive, totally, I mean, truly, I think 95% of the calls that were handled at the time were with an aggressive attitude. And then we show up and the atmosphere is changing, the attitude is changing, the way calls are handled are changing. And they brought us on with that idea because they needed that. They needed to make a change within the city, within the department. Prior to our being hired, I mean, a lot of the guys had come from Vietnam. So they came from an attitude of let's continue to go to war.
Sure.
You know, so they needed to change that mindset. And I think that was challenging for the department and for the officers that were already in place.
And Flossie, when you were a detective, was going into that environment, because I assume that you were a trailblazer there too, was there anything unique about that experience in coming in as a female detective?
Well, it was, but if I may just touch a bit on what Felicia was saying, I think getting, even in the detective division, but also patrol primarily, getting the officers to trust us, because one of the questions was, can we as females handle it physically? And then there was with me personally, I have, my husband probably wouldn't think so, but I have a quiet voice, okay? So it was like there was a question, can you rise to the occasion when you have to be authoritative, or then physically can you handle it? So proving ourselves in those instances was really important, and that was something that we had to do. And then coming into the detective division, it was more with the administration more so than with the officers, because once again, when I went to detective division, the first two detective that I was assigned to, Jerry Backrich and Don Steed, were awesome. I mean, just super guys. Again, they were people that wanted to see us succeed. And again, they saw abilities in me at that particular time that that they felt it was worth cultivating. So it was the administration, the lieutenant, the captain, the deputy chief that had some concerns and some issues and put up some roadblocks. But fortunately, as with patrol, there were several detectives that was there to help me go through those barriers. Not to mention, one of the things that I cherish to this day is that we had several black police officers, male police officers, that were extremely supportive. And one of the things that, once I left patrol, one of the things that they would do with me is every so often I get these voicemail messages, or I would get a card, or I would get a single flower or a bouquet of flowers, and it usually had a card attached, or the voicemail would say something like, I know what you're going through, I got your back, you can count on me, or hang in there. There were always encouraging messages, and it seems that these little tidbits would come on one of my worst days, when I was having a bad day, or when I've had a run-in with one of the, say, the lieutenant in particular. Then these little things would miraculously appear, and I knew where the cards and the voicemail was coming from, but sometimes I didn't know exactly where the flowers were coming from. And it made it very special because it always had that note to hang in there, or when they did reveal themselves, it was call me if you need to talk, call me if you need a friend. So I knew, and not only the black police officers, but there was also the white police officers. I knew that I had somebody holding my back against some of the things that, now, they might not have, and I don't think they really could understand what we were going through, but I knew that they were there for us, or for me to talk to when I needed to.
Well, I think the black officers really did pave the way for us in a sense, because they had already gone through it. They had already gone through the racism, the discrimination, the being treated differently, being held down in certain positions. They had already gone through that process. So when we came on, that particular process of race was not as extreme for us as being female.
Do you know, Felicia,
Really?
I remember there were 2 officers that come to mind right now that were going through major issues that had to do with race when we were on. And I think because they were going through that, they had an idea what we were up against.
Yeah.
But 2 come to mind, whose name I won't mention, but they were really going through some things.
Yeah, and many times the black officers had reached out to the organizations that represent minorities, the NAACP, the Urban League. There was another organization at the time, I don't really remember what they were called, but they reached out to those organizations saying, look, these are the things that are going on within the police department. These are the things that are happening to us personally. We need your support.
Let's turn that around and talk about the community. How were you received in the community?
The community was extraordinary. I worked South Sacramento and I worked Oak Park. I worked downtown. Oak Park was my special place. The officers would say, why are you hanging out at the community center? It was brand new. Why do you hang out there? There's not going to be anybody to cover you if something happens to you there. You need to not be in Oak Park. And I'm like, well, this is my district, first of all. And secondly, I felt completely supported there. So, you know, I felt like the community kids would come up and they'd say, oh, Mommy, look, you know, it's a police officer. And old people, especially the seniors embraced the fact that there was a woman in uniform. And it was something, they would say stuff like, I didn't think I'd see this in my lifetime, you know. The same way we felt about Obama. And so, can I say that?
You can say that.
Okay. But you know, they embraced us, and oftentimes, though, this is the thing that people forget. When you're in uniform, and you're in the thick of a situation, people don't see black, white, male, female. They see the uniform. They see the uniform. They respond to the uniform. One particular story in McKinley Park, we had a 415 call disturbance. My partner and I got to the house. He had me approach the door, and I was talking to this gentleman. The man was butt naked, did not have on a stitch of clothes. And he's here, he's explaining to me about his wife, and he's going on and on and on. And I hadn't said anything to that point. You know, he's looking at me, he's talking to me, he's naked as a jaybird, but he does not realize that I'm a woman. And so finally, when he gets done ranting, I say, well, sir, maybe you should start by putting on some clothes. And he's like, oh my God, she's a woman. And he yells back to his wife, she's a woman, she's a woman. So, and that's really how it is. They don't respond to you personally when there's something going down in a community. They see the uniform. They respond to the uniform.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you were saying. The community, the attitude was different because it was new. And once they found out they were kind of fascinated. Then I think they got on board too to see how we would do. A couple of incidents like Felicia was talking about, and it kind of goes back to the trust too. I remember we had, my first assignment was the North area, Adam 34. And I often said that everything that could happen to an officer happened to me when I was Adam 34.
What neighborhood was that?
I'm sorry, that's North area. And primarily Rio Lincoln South was but it was a neighborhood that I was comfortable in. I also had relatives that lived there. But I had my first high-speed chase. Had my first time I had to pull my gun out. Had the first time a gun was pulled on me. And I also think, well, this one I'm not quite sure about, but I do know that when we got back to the station, there were bullet holes in the back of my car.
Wow.
So and then I had my first homicide. I had my first homicide there in Rio Linda and South. But like Felicia, when you're talking about the community reaction, the one incident that happened to me, and one of the newspapers did a cartoon about it. My partner and I, Dana Falgenhauer was my partner at the time. We're at Rio Linda South, and he asked me to go back to the squad to get something. We were just working with this little guy that was intoxicated. So he asked me to go back to the car to get something, and I asked him a question, or I'm discussing it with him, and the little guy who was totally inebriated initially, when I started talking, he's kind of sobering up. And then as I started walking away, he goes, not only does he sound like a girl, but he walks like a girl as well. So like Felicia said, initially it's the response that they have an officer here that's going to help them, that's going to help them handle that situation. That's what they're concerned about initially. However, there was another incident, and it was the newness of it all. I had one guy downtown, when I was downtown, he decided to tell me, I don't think it bothered him so much that I was a black female, but, well, I do think it bothered him because I was a black female, because he proceeded to tell me where my job is, in the kitchen and in the bedroom.
Really?
And that's where I should be. And it's kind of interesting that my partner reacted to that more so than I did. I also found that, and with the officers, they reacted more to the N-word than I did.
Yeah.
Really?
I have partners like that too.
Up, yeah, I was brought up. My parents brought me up to the N-word was something. It was something bad, but I was never taught that the N-word was me. But I was taught it was a bad person. So when I heard it, I mean, it didn't have the same effect on me, though I don't like it, and I definitely don't use it. But I think my fellow officers, because see, I knew that wasn't me. I've always known that that wasn't me, okay? But they took it in the other, and so some of my training officers, I had to educate them that don't react. You know, it's a word. I know who I am, you know who I am, and it's just a word. But that was...
When you move forward from those years to today, and as you know, there's been a lot of tension between the police and the community. We've had organizations like Black Lives Matter sprout up. There have been all sorts of cases of alleged and actually found police brutality that have been talked about. What is the view from your perspective of how far the police department has come from the days when you joined?
They still have a lot to do. There's a lot of work to do. It's unfortunate because I don't think the recruitment efforts are as great as they could be, should be. I mean, look at Flossie and I, 40 years, and just 3 months ago they had their first black female sergeant. We're 40 years out of law enforcement, and it took 40 years to promote a female black sergeant. I don't think that the recruitment across the board, not just Sacramento Police Department, I mean across nationwide, I don't think the recruitment efforts are sufficient, and I think there's a twofold reason for that. One, I don't think the departments are actually actively going out to do outreach like they did when Flossie and I came on. And the other segment is young people themselves. They see the police department as a hostile, negative place that does not welcome them because they don't see us on the street, you know. So it's a double whammy to bring those two together, and it's necessary to bring those two together, or we're just going to stay in this place where factions of organizations believe that Black Lives Matter is the only way they're going to see any resolution to getting fairness within these departments.
You know, if I may, one of the other areas that I would love to see, and I believe in my heart that they are making improvements. When we came on, and even after we had been on for a while, advanced officers training. I remember when they started introducing
crisis intervention.
Well, diversity was one of the things that they. But I remember when I first, like a few of the advanced and this is a course where every officer is required to go through on a yearly basis. I remember when they first started bringing diversity training in, which I thought was great. However, the person that taught the class, it was their reaction to the different parts of town, and most often it was a minority area of town. So that, to me, left a negative impact on these officers who are going to go out there. Or when you come through the police academy and the instructor that comes in to teach you about diversity, point out this neighborhood and this neighborhood as a negative neighborhood. So what you're doing is you're implementing in the officers before they even get on the street that this is a bad neighborhood and this is a bad neighborhood, and therefore they should be treated this way, and they should, this group should be treated that way. My hopes and my prayers is that advanced officer training have changed in that we instruct our instructors that you cannot put your prejudices on the new officers that are going out. So that is one of my hopes and one of my dreams, and I believe that they're doing it. But
And
that was one of
actually,
the things that we experienced.
You know what, that would also help if they had that type of training in the academy. Instead of just waiting until you've been on the department a year or 2 years.
Right.
If, as part of your academy training, give more diversity courses. Because, a lot of these kids that they were hiring, and this was no different than when we came on, besides that faction of people that came from Vietnam, they're warriors, they also are hiring people who came right out of high school, college.
And this is
They've had no life experiences.
This is a really rich conversation, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both for your service, and thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests, and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at KVIE.